we are continuing with Mr. McIntosh's cross-examination of Mr. Wright.
Thank you. Can I ask you to have some documents in front of you, Mr. Wright? In addition to the sort of normal ones you've always had, could you also have CD 488 and CD 518? That's the Old and New Towns of Edinburgh World Heritage Site Management Plan 2011-16 and the ICOMOS Guidance on Heritage Impact Assessments. So before we start, did you have any recollection about the question I asked before lunch about whether there were any particular schemes that were produced during the workshop process that had less than 150 bedrooms and/or no development on the western and no development on the western playground?
You could allow me to locate the core document that you'd asked me to. Perhaps in answer to your question, I might have been focusing on the wrong aspect of it, but what I do recall is that, and I think this is in my inquiry report, or if it's not there, it's within the heritage statement, that there would have been some discussion of a pavilion. And my recollection of that is that Mr. Martindale of Historic Scotland might have put it during the course of one of the design workshops when the examination of perhaps what the level of development of the West Playground could accommodate was being considered at that time. That I think one of the examples that he quoted was extension to the National Gallery of Washington, if I remember correctly.
I wasn't so much asking about consultees raising issues. I know that Mr. Wilkinson raised issues about less from your clients to build less than 150 rooms and nothing on the western playground.
I can't say that I recall that, and I think the evidence would be best given by Mr. Gibb of Hoskins Architects on that.
I shall do that, Mr. Wright. Thank you. So if we could look at the at CD 199, that's your Heritage Impact Assessment for Scheme 2, and perhaps if you would turn to page 21, and then we'll be in the right place.
So could you give me the page number again?
Page 21, please. If I understand what's written here correctly, in this section you're explaining how you undertook the HIA, and then as we turn over the page onto page 23, you list, transcribed from the management plan, extracts from the Statement of Universal Value.
Yes, that's correct.
And listed them. Once you've listed them, once we get over to page 28, you discuss methodology, and there's a section on integrity and authenticity.
Yes, that's correct.
And in that, at 6.2.2, you list 3 attributes that you say in particularly reference integrity and authenticity amongst the attributes. Are they the only 3 that you think reference those aspects of outstanding universal value?
They may or may not be. It is in terms of defining what meaning that may have in terms of the ICOMOS guidelines and trying to find them within the management plan. So that would have been the result of that exercise.
So this list at 622, is that that's you telling the reporters and the council and Scottish ministers which attributes of the World heritage sites, outstanding universality, you think address the qualities of integrity and authenticity? Or are there other ones?
I think it's plain by the wording of clause 6.2.2 that the attributes that define the OUV and which address the qualities of either integrity or authenticity are considered to include the following.
Are you saying there are other ones, you just haven't told us what they are?
There may be others, but I'm considering that these in particular, the advice that is set, I believe, by ICOMOS is that there's an expectation that these will be defined within the management plan. And I think in terms of that particular management plan, there may be no precise definition of it.
Your microphone, Mr. McIntosh.
We'll look at CD 488, which is the management plan. Perhaps if we start with the index. And it tells us we need to go to page 17.
Yes, I have that.
So, as you've just said, the definitions of integrity and authenticity are rather brief here. But what concerns me is when you've conducted your exercise at this level of detail, you haven't specified any others overtly, but you're saying there may be others that you haven't mentioned.
I think that's correct.
Let's move on to, in your HIA, if we turn back onto page 29, you deal with the ICOMOS criteria for assessments. I want to look at evaluation criteria 2, which is on page 31. I know a lot of this was dealt with by Mr. Mackay, so I'm going to sort of try and fit in round what he's already done, and therefore take some things without taking time up. But you've already dealt with criteria 1, categorization of the value of assets, and that's been dealt with, so I won't touch this. And this is the scale of change, and you've helpfully at 643 listed your interpretations of what no change to major change means, and these come from the annexes to the ICOMOS guidelines, don't they?
I believe that is true.
And you've simply picked ones that are perhaps more relevant to this building than some of the other ones that have archaeological aspects and things.
Yes, I've had regard to the table, which I think is Appendix 3B, in which there are 4 columns listed, and that evidence, I think, was touched upon in cross-examination by Mr. Mackay.
It was, and if we turn on to evaluation criteria 3, the overall effect of the development on OUV and on heritage assets, still on page 31, after your explanatory text, you have another table, this one helpfully in colour, where you go from major beneficial to major adverse. Now, I noticed that you seem to have added in the concept of adverse and beneficial, which doesn't appear, it doesn't scream out from the ICOMOS guidance. Is there a particular reason for that?
It's the normal way of dealing with the heritage impact assessment in terms of whether something is either adverse or beneficial. That's a standard way of approaching this.
Of course. So the next section, you have a table. And I want to look at this table and make sure that I understand it correctly. This is section 6.4.5. So let's imagine an asset of medium value with a minor change. And that will be said to produce a negligible impact. Have I got that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And if we look at a very high value asset with a moderate change, we get a moderate impact. and for a minor change we get a minor impact.
Yes, that's correct.
Sorry, CD 518, the bottom of page 8.
Sorry, so could you give me the page number?
Page 8, please. So it's the page that has at the top paragraphs 5, 6, 5, 7, and 5, 8. I think we were there with Mr. Mackay 2 days ago. Yesterday? Yesterday, I think. Time flies. What I wanted to do is just to understand the table is similar to yours, but it's got some different phraseology, and for a very high, the bottom of page 8 is a very high value asset, which you don't have. So let's go over to the next page, and it's repeated. On the left hand side we have a range from very high to negligible value, and across the top, unfortunately the top is on the previous page, we have no change to minor change. So if we could look at the medium value asset with a minor change, we have a green field and the impact is slight. Do you see that? Now I'm not going to get into argument whether there's a difference between slight and negligible, because I think that might end up getting silly. But if we look at the very high row, that's the top one, and we go from the minor change column, we get moderate or large. And yet in your table we get minor. Why is that?
This is because the values are aligned with other recommendations within the UK which take into account UK policy and guidance.
I want to just check one more thing before I come back to that. If you look on the ICOMOS table and count up the number of boxes, there are the same number of boxes in both tables except you have a detrimental row along the bottom. If we ignore that, there are 5 rows and 5 columns. And you have 5 boxes that are either moderate or major. And the ICOMOS guidelines have more than that. They in fact have 9 boxes. Now, standing or not, there may be English guidance on this. Surely the effect of choosing it to go this way is that changes, medium scale changes, have a lower level of impact. And that's a real effect on your conclusions, isn't it?
It may well be, using the methodology that I have described.
You have a document CD 540 to hand. Seen this document before?
Yes, yes, I am familiar with the bulk of it.
So, who produced it and what's it called?
It's the BSI Standards Publication Guide to the Conservation of Historic Buildings.
I suppose, being the British standard, it would apply across the whole of the UK.
It does indeed, but there are, of course, other guidance on similar matters, which also applies through ICOMOS, through the various charters, and through other publications also, to which I give regard.
This particular one on page 16, if you look at figure 2, ignore the fact that someone can't spell moderate, which worries me. Is this table not effectively the same as the ICOMOS one we've just been looking at, in that it has 9, in fact it may have more than that, it has 9 fields that mention moderate impact, as against yours that have 5 for moderate and above?
Could I ask that I have in front of me the equivalent table from my document so that I can compare all three?
I'll set it up. So you need CD 199, page 32, and that's your document. That's your HIA, which I think you had a moment ago. No, I appreciate that. I think here it comes. And then you need CD 540, which is the British standard. And then, just for completeness, you need CD 518, which is the ICOMOS document, and you're on page 8 for that.
I have that. I have all three.
Well,
yes.
So, again, let's just do a double check. Looking at the British Standard document, if you have a very high value asset and a minor impact, they describe the impact as moderate, spelt wrong, large. And for a medium value asset and a minor impact, they describe it as slight. Whereas if we look at the ICOMOS table, it's the same. And we look at your table, it would be minor and negligible. Do you see that?
Yes, I do, yeah.
Without labouring the point, and I'm sure the reporters can look at this carefully themselves, you're not using the British Standard and ICOMOS table, you're using another table from somewhere else.
Yes, that's correct. The table that I'm using is aligned more closely because of the need to compare impact with the EIA methodology, but also with the English heritage, as it was then, publication seeing history in the view.
And of course it'd be a matter for the reporters and Scottish ministers whether they were to give primacy to the English heritage guidance or the ICOMOS guidance, wouldn't it?
Yes, I would accept that.
And again, if it is correct, or more correct, as a matter of policy, to use the ICOMOS guidance rather than the English heritage guidance, would that not have an effect on many of your conclusions?
It would have some effect, but not the degree to which the values would change dramatically.
Well, I think we're probably coming on to look at all the values, or many of them, because, of course, Mr. Wilkinson has produced a table, and I'm not proposing to put every line to you, you'll be pleased to hear. I'm going to put small parts of it, and hopefully, in a sense, give you the opportunity to respond to how it works, because otherwise we could be here for a very long time, and I don't want to do that. So, if you could have in front of you his topic paper on the World Heritage Assessment, which is EW30, I think, but I'm going to double check that because I've closed it down by mistake. No, it's EW30. It's EW30. It is, yes. Now, at the end of it, there's a distressingly small spreadsheet. But I think it would be simply to look at one line. And for the sake of clarity, let's look at the first one, the castle ramparts. So, do you have that before you?
Yes, I do, yes.
Right. So, obviously, the view is listed, and that relates to the views in your document, and he then records your value, where there's a difference, which there isn't here, he records it particularly, but he records your value as very high. He then records your assessment as no change for both schemes. He rates a note of his own, and he then says he records his value and why he's reached the view that it's adverse. And the view he's ultimately reached, which in this case is moderate adverse. You see that?
I do see that, but he gives no reasoning for it.
Well, if you just look at that table, you see that you and he agree about the value.
Yes, I do.
And that isn't true for all of them, but for this one it is true.
It is true.
If you think about the impact on a scheme, if you have a slightly different table, you'll produce different conclusions some of the time, won't you?
Some of the time you may, but it's the question of how you apply the particular judgment on what it is you're actually seeing within the view, and what part the development has to the person looking at the view, and whether indeed the development is even visible within that view or a large component of it.
Before we go to the views, I'd like to raise one more issue on the ICOMOS guidelines and your assessment, your heritage impact assessment, and that deals with page 28 of your CD 199. Not page 28. Page 29 of CD 199. This is the section headed mitigation, the top of page 29. And I can see there that you've made references to some of the paragraphs in the ICOMOS guidelines. Particularly, you've concerned paragraph 6.1 and 6.2. But you haven't mentioned paragraph 6.3, and I'd like to look at that. That's in CD 518, and it's on page 11.
Yes, I have that.
If we look at section 6 on page 11 of CD 518, the first section explains its iterative process, and you've explained that. And the second section, it talked about managing sustainable change, and every reasonable effort should be made to avoid, eliminate, or minimize adverse impacts. And there's talk about public benefit, and you've dealt with that in your report. But 6.3 doesn't seem to be mentioned in your report. Is there a reason for that?
I have dealt with it in the heritage statement. I cannot say exactly where, but it deals with the question of mitigation. It may even be in the section which has been referred to. If you could just
Sorry, not on page 29 in the heritage impact assessment, explaining your methodology there.
I think it is if you look at 631, and if I direct you to the sixth line of that. Fifth line, as noted in 4.6 above, mitigation measures have been considered at each stage of the design process, leading to constant refinement of the design over a prolonged period. So the difference between that and, say, what ICOMOS are referring to is where guidance may come out of the process, which is an iterative part of the design process, rather than necessarily something which is the basis of a planning application, which has gone through all the pre-application consultation procedures to get to a point. And even if there is still disagreement, say, between the planning authority and the applicant, then one would expect the methodology of the documents which accompany the planning application in terms of justification to make that abundantly clear. I have done, and certainly in the case if you were to make that comparison, which I accept we cannot do here, but in the trial example which was undertaken for Market Street, for which there was agreement that that should be done with CEC, which I have explained in my inquiry report, And that was dealt with differently because the design was still in that iterative process. It had not yet finalized in terms of material scale and so forth. So this is a slightly different application of where we are in the process, and I believe that's what 6.3 refers to.
It may be I'm misunderstanding, but 6.3 seems to include at the second sentence a requirement to consider other options for development, including site selection, location, timing, duration and design. And I accept that site selection and location is included in evidence lodged by the appellants. Timing perhaps seems less relevant in a permanent development, as does duration. But design, aren't we returning to the failure to include options that do not involve a 150-bedroom hotel and something on the Western Playground?
No, the options that were developed, and it's very clear from the design process, which is summarized within this document to which we made reference earlier in the evidence that I gave, that there is a process in which options are considered and the design approach is considered, and that is part of the mitigation in relation to a brief which everyone at that time was aware of. So it is a question of balancing all of those factors, and then one would accept that it is only at the point that all of those factors are settled that is then possible to assess the impact, because it's constantly moving up to that point. And if the process that is adopted is the correct one, is that in the process of looking at, say, wireframes and so forth, there is still the opportunity for redesign, and that's why I refer to the fact that this had been done on a multi-professional basis. It's not just my views, it's the other members of the team who are contributing to that, so that there is this coordinated approach to how impact is being both assessed and how the architects may be responding to that in the final development of the design.
I will obviously have to ask other members of the team about alternative options that didn't involve a 150-bedroom hotel and development in the Western Playground, but you're not able to tell me about any. So I think what I'll do is we'll move on to the images. Could you please have before you, if you could put away both the 518 and 540, but not 488. We might need it later. Please could you have the large volume of visualizations which we may need, and I would hate to have them not nearby at the moment we talk about them. And I might just spend a moment sorting out myself.
Tosh, which large document of visualizations?
I'm not sure which number it is, but we were referring to it yesterday.
Is it CD 596?
I think it is, yes. It's headed Edinburgh Royal High School Selected Photo Montages based on 2018 photography, May 2008. But if just have that to hand, it may come in useful.
So this is Mr. Van Grieken's document.
It is Mr. Van Grieken's document. Occasionally, in the past, I thought we should have it to hand in case we have to. So what I'd like to do is to look again at CD 199, your assessment, and go to page 35, which is the first of the 40 or so images. And I want to explain how I'm going to do this so that other people do not despair unnecessarily about time. I'm very conscious that Mr. Mackay has asked questions. It's page 35, Mr. Wright.
And just to be clear, this is for Scheme 2, it's a CD 199.
It's for Scheme 2. We may end up going to looking at Scheme 1 images on the way past, but it's not very often, so I'm therefore not going to get it out quite yet. But it may be a good idea to have 14049 just to hand. So the reason I'm using these is, as you explained, they're on A4, they meet the portal size, and I accept they're not visualizations in the full technical meaning of the word, and I'm not going to ask you questions about are they good visualizations, because I realise that's not your expertise. I'm also going to skirt over and around topics that have been dealt with by Mr. Mackay already, because I don't want to duplicate. And there are also a couple of topics which I know Mr. Innes is intending to discuss, so I won't touch on those because that causes repetition. So if we look at view 1, Castle Ramparts, I know that Mr. McCarthy asked you about the greenery gap, as it were, and the landscape capacity study, and I'm not going to revisit it. So I'm going to move swiftly through images 1, 2, and 3, because both 3s, to 3A North Bridge, because those ones aren't that dissimilar to the conversations that were had about 3A North Bridge. So I'll move past that, and that gets us to view 4 on page 45.
Is it in order for me to point out we've had discussion on this also?
We have, but I'm going to be very, very precise about this one. So I want just to look at 4D for the... so we look at 4D, and we see by turning over the page that you've assessed its value as high and the impact as negligible adverse. Now, I want to look at your relevant clauses, and only at the ones initially, the ones in chapter 3. So particularly 3.8. This is going to be messy because we're going to have 2 documents open. So a copy of CD 199, a copy of CD 488 would be helpful at this point. Open at chapter 3. So what we should have is page 45 of your HIA for Scheme 2. You should have a copy of the attributes listed in the management plan, and between those two we should be able to not get too confused. So 3.8, you're saying that this is a high value asset, and I've got that right.
Yes, that's correct.
And if we just look over the page, we see the impact you're assessing as negligible.
Yes, that's correct.
And if we look back to page 31 to your helpful table, we see that either means slight changes to historic building elements or setting that hardly affect it, or slight changes or modifications to historic townscape elements or views such as they are hardly affected. I mean, they're not that different. You see that? Page 31.
Yes, I do, yes.
We now look at attribute 3.8. Which is quite long, but within it contains a reference towards the end of how the townscape is designed to take full advantage of the topography.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah, and in fact earlier on today you described a point along this road, and I'm not quite sure where, as a critical part of the route out of town, because there's a view you get to as you go around that corner.
Yes, if it helps the inquiry, that information is to be found in APP 53, and it is in figures 5 and 6, I believe, of that exercise.
It is, yes. And the next attribute you've listed is 3.10, which talks about the nature of the plan extensions. And perhaps I don't need to draw that everyone's attention to that, but 3.15 is perhaps more interesting. It talks about how these planned extensions to the new town, of which this is the 4th, set standards for Scotland and beyond and exerted a major influence on development of urban architecture and town planning throughout Europe. And then you also list 3.18, which is to do with integrity, and 3.19, which is also to do with authenticity. Now, the reason I raise those 5 relevant attributes of all of them listed here is I do not understand how building a building, and this is the smaller one, at the end of that street is, what's the word you use in paragraph page 31? Is a slight change or modification to historic townscape of views that they are hardly affected. I don't understand that. And given that I could go through the entire document and ask this question again and again and again, and I'm not going to do that, I thought this was a good opportunity to ask you to explain why that is a slight change.
It is what is actually seen within that view from that particular viewpoint, and it's the degree to which the development changes what is seen at that point.
So your position is that because we have effectively a corridor, I think you called it a chasm at one point when talking about the wall of the prison. Was it right you called it a chasm, or I imagine that?
I think I may have called it a chasm at some point. It's rather difficult to reconstruct what it might have been because the walls have gone and the height of the walls changed at some time as well. So there were points in time where it may have become a chasm, and it could have been a chasm in certain lighting conditions, the likes of which we have been discussing in relation to extension.
Yes, but we have a view where we have two things, one on each side. We have Carlton Hill, which is topography, and we have St Andrew's House on the right. And at the end is Winnie Hill, if I get my geography correctly. Now, this proposal, this is Scheme 2, sticks a building in that gap.
Yes, but it doesn't stick a building in the visible part of the landscape, which is the larger part of the visible landscape, because Winnie Hill, the profile of that against the sky, is tapering down towards the left. And this is where consideration of the locations of, this is why I say very clearly in my documentation that the redefinition of the historic townscape is an important consideration after St Andrew's House was built, because we can certainly look at these images trying to imagine how they might have been in 1829 and 1885. But what we have now is a situation that has changed that quite dramatically. And the views that you get of the landscape are now going to be different to how they were in making the assessments in Stark's time. But that's not to deny the fact that you don't see the landscape, and the adverse impact that we're looking at here reflects the amount of that within this cone of vision that is obliterated by the development.
But this is a OUV assessment. We're assessing it against date of designation, aren't we? To 1995.
Yes, but I think it's been generally accepted that that is a starting point, and that there have to be increased levels of understanding of all of the values that come into play on something like this, rather than just work from that single inscription.
So let me be clear about this. When you say, and this is a good example I would suggest, and if it isn't, we can go to another one. When you say there's an impact of putting a large structure at a point that is critical in some ways in a view, or may be seen as that wasn't there before, is a negligible impact, you're doing that because there's lots of other stuff around it which distract you from it, and because it wasn't how it was intended to be built some 100 years before. Have I got that right? No,
it isn't, because there's a change in how it appeared 100 years before. That doesn't come into consideration. The view has to be what is within the view and what is seen in the present time, just to be clear about that. But it is informed, obviously, by other factors in terms of understanding the setting of the Hamilton building. And in this case, the Hamilton building at this point, one would get a glimpse of that. I think we've established that, as it might have been in the past. At the moment, where it is difficult to see is because of the adverse factors that come from those factors being identified within the heritage statement very clearly as being detrimental, which also come into consideration. We're not dealing with a constant state, and one of the great difficulties of dealing with, say, design landscape is that it does change over time, and that sometimes as changes are made to the landscape, whereas, say, in the case of buildings or archaeology, things may remain constant. Design landscapes are constantly changing as trees mature, and sometimes those viewpoints will change as well. I think we've seen a very good example of that within the last 4 years, certainly of my involvement in the project, where what might have been seen, the last sort of fragments of the Royal High School, which were visible from this point, at the moment are invisible, so one's dealing with that.
Let's look at a little bit further along the street, and I think we might as well just grab the bull by the horns and go to page 49. and view 004. Now, you've quite properly assessed, you've assessed the value as high of this. I think Mr. Wilkinson might assess it as very high, but that probably isn't that important. This is scheme 2, and we see that in the upper image, the view of Arthur's Seat and Winnie Hill and Salisbury Crags is framed by Carlton Hill and its trees and planting and rocks on the left, by St Andrew's House on the right, and that's correct, isn't it?
Yes, and just to remind the inquiry that we've arrived at this position by having gone through an assessment on on view 4C, and essentially what I'm analysing here is that sequence of movement, and I have to stress that point. I'm not looking at just individual images. I'm also looking at the experience of the whole of the townscape within that. And I appreciate that in terms of the evidence which is coming to the inquiry, Professor Taverner will probably be able to give clearer guidance on that point.
But your position in these images is that the amount of impact increases as you go along this view because you go from negligible to minor. And what I'm putting to you is that it actually goes from negligible to somewhat more than that. And the reason I'm putting that to you is because you have described this view as it emerges round the corner as critical. And yet, in Scheme 2, a 4.5-storey building appears. And if we look at CD 049 at view 004B, which is on page 42, thank you very much, we have a much bigger building, a building that I think is described by various people as a tower with a civic presence. So I want to be clear that I've got you right, because I think it's important to put it to you. Your position is the construction of a tower of civic presence and a new urban realm at this location, in a view you've described as critical, is a minor impact. Is that right?
But the reasoning for that is given in the previous view.
Let's look at the reasoning, page 48. So, I can read it out, but let's look at the first sentence. Much of the west wing is exposed to view. This is the previous view, where of course less of the west wing is exposed to view, and it's further away. And it occupies the gap in the view between the far pylon and the forecourt of St Andrew's House and the edge of the hill as the road changes direction. The scale of the new wing is appropriate within the setting. And apart from the narrowing down the view, the relationship with St Andrew's House remains harmonious. Well, firstly, the relationship between Carlton Hill and St Andrew's House has been changed by the addition of a tower of civic presence, hasn't it?
I'm sorry, I've lost the location as to what it is you're quoting.
Page 48 of CD 199, or, if you would prefer, page 40 of CD 049. This is your assessment of the previous view and your reasoning for why it was considered to be moderate in the previous scheme and minor in Scheme 2. So you've told me that the reason why it's minor is in the previous one, and we're looking at that, and that's on page 48 of CD 199.
No, the specific reference I made was for CD 049. It's in respect of Scheme 1.
Well, if we look at CD 049, we're looking for view 004B. You would need to be on page 42. And we have a picture of the Tower of Civic Presence sitting in this critical view. And we have the relevant clauses you've listed, some of which we've discussed. And you then have the reasoning. The west wing emerges once more as a tower, focusing the view towards Salisbury Crag and Arthur's Seat, which is framed between the two buildings. My first question, and I think it could get a yes or no answer, is why does the view need framing?
I wouldn't say the view doesn't necessarily need to be framed as such, but I'm looking at the impact of what happens if the view is framed and whether that has a negative impact or not. And my view is at this location that it does not necessarily, as part of a sequence going from in the images from D to A in the opposite direction by the time that we come up to A, which is the final one in the sequence.
Your microphone again, Mr. Mark.
Forget. This image you assessed in Scheme 1 as the minor adverse impact. So what I'd like to do is to go back, and it's going to involve looking at CD 199, page 31, to your helpful table. If you have that, you'll see that for minor, this is paragraph 6.4.3, it says here, change to key historic building elements that the asset is slightly different. Change to setting of a historic building that is noticeably changed. Changes to historic townscape elements of views that they are noticeably changed. Now, would you categorize building a tower of civic presence in this location as a notable change, or perhaps a significant modification, which is the next paragraph, or even comprehensive? Because it's Mr. Wilkinson's position that it's comprehensive.
I challenge Mr. Wilkinson's position on that, in that, and it may be of help to the inquiry, because I think what we're opening up as a discussion which has not really been embarked upon, which is getting back to that notion of what might be deemed to be catastrophic. Sufficiently catastrophic to be so major adverse, and I'm not inventing words here because it comes from the ICOMOS guidelines, but to me something that fulfills that quality in particular would be that it would obliterate the view in its entirety. It would be something that would have an impact, and also either one of two things could happen at this point: that it would overpower the dominance, if that were indeed possible given the strength of the building, of St Andrew's House, which is one of the key buildings I think we generally accepted of, even though it's from the 1930s, of a government building to which reference is made within the nomination documents in terms of the importance of institutional buildings of that type, or in fact the view. But the building does not do that, and I think had the building done that, I don't think an application would have been lodged. It would have been changed so that that potential would not have happened.
Picking up that, isn't that one of the points that's been said to you and those you act for in all the workshops, all the way back to 2009?
Yes, but it's not major adverse. We weren't using terms like major adverse. We were using terms like impact and the potential impact of the building for a number of options that were coming forward at that stage. The assessment which is made here is not on any one of those options. That's made very clear in my heritage impact assessment, and the journey that the scheme went on in terms of being considered, that sort of mitigation and the public consultation, the feedback that comes from all of that, into a scheme that has a completely different response to the site and the setting and the potential visibility of the scheme within that. Now, I would regard that as being an entirely reasonable process upon which to go as part of that journey. It is only then at the end of that exercise that you would enter into, but none of the discussions that were held at that stage would come forward to something that might have had that catastrophic impact of which I made reference before.
I understand about the catastrophic impact. It's not a word you use in your methodology. But
I would accept that.
If we look at your table, going back to your table on page 32 of CD 199. Now, let's not quibble about whether this value of this asset, this view which you've described as critical, is very high or high. So let's stick with high, which is what you've said. If you reach the view that the impact is minor in your assessment, which I think is your position, of Scheme 2, or moderate in Scheme 1, your table describes the impact as minor or moderate, which raises the question of what the point of the table was. But if you look at the ICOMOS table, which is back in CD 518 on page 9, it moves to moderate large or moderate slight, or very large, or moderate large. So your table is affecting the consequence based on your assessment. And there is a consequence if someone else took the view that the impact was larger than you do.
Yes, I accept that. These things are matters of professional judgment. But I think I have given an explanation to the inquiry as to the basis of how the levels of impact were calculated and what they were based on.
Thank you. I'm grateful for that explanation, because it means I don't need to go through every single calculation with you. Because, as you've explained, it's a matter of professional judgment, and ultimately the reporters can take the view. So what we'll do is go back to view 4, and then move on to another one. So we go back to page 49 of CD.
Sorry, could I have just a break?
Oh, that would be very good. This is a very appropriate moment.
Of course you can.
Tired.
A 15-minute break, would that be okay?
10 minutes for me.
Okay.
But if it's the right time to take a proper break, then I will...
Yeah, let's just have a 15-minute break just now then. Okay.
Yes, if I may, sir. You'll just have noted that Mr. Innes, on my behalf and with my blessing, was speaking to the witness simply because it had been proper for me to do so. But it is clear, I think, that Mr. Wright has now been on for 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, or whatever it is, a long, long time, and it may well be that the cumulative impact is taking its toll. So I'd simply ask if we could bear that in mind at an appropriate stage. It may be we would have to ask for another break. I do wonder whether there's any realistic prospect of finishing all of his evidence today. It would seem unlikely, and therefore I wonder whether, in fairness to everybody, in particular Mr. Wright, whether at an appropriate stage we take a break. I have checked with Mr. McIntosh. He indicates he might be an hour or a bit more. Mr. Innes is going to be an hour to 2 hours, and it doesn't seem to me, unless I've got that wrong, realistic to assume that we'll finish both of these this afternoon, having regard to how long this witness has been giving evidence and subject to lengthy, detailed cross-examination. I also say, in the interests of the inquiry, of course, we want to get the best possible evidence. So, drawing all of these things together, I simply say that we should all take note as to how long it would be fair to the witness to continue. No more than that, sir. I'm entirely in your hands. If you insist we go on, we go on. But there does come a limit.
I think you're absolutely right to draw that to our attention, Mr. Steele. And as we said to Mr. Wright just before the break, he should feel free to let us know when he would benefit from a pause. We're happy to do that, so just let us know. Thinking about how much longer we might be with Mr. Wright, I'm assuming no more than finishing sometime tomorrow morning.
Well, having just spoken to my learned friends, that would be right, sir. An hour, which will become more than it, because it always does, an hour to 2 hours, which will probably become a couple of hours. I, at the moment, have got very little re-examination. There may be questions from you, or there may not be, but certainly at some stage tomorrow morning, I would expect mid-morning or so to finish up on current prognosis. Of course, if we adjourn a little bit earlier, that might push it back a little bit. And then we need to address you, all of us need to address you later this afternoon about future timing, which will be influenced by how long this might take.
Exactly that. So we'll come to that discussion at the end of the afternoon. Let's proceed with Mr. McIntosh's cross-examination, and Mr. Wright can let us know if he needs another break at some point.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Wright, do you still have one of the 004 images from Scheme 2 in front of you?
Yes, I do. Yes.
Which one do you have in front of you?
In one of the publications I have 004A.
That's very helpful, because I wanted to return to the issue of the lodge that we touched on this morning, and simply ask you to see if you'll accept three things. So in 004A we can't see the lodge, and therefore I'm assuming that you would agree that at any position further back towards Waterloo Place you wouldn't see the lodge either, until you've gone quite a long way around the curve. Would that be fair?
Yes, I think from my own analysis, again referring to the reference APP53, also confirms that fact, that there are points of maximum visibility in which the gate lodge appears in those where you see the most of the western elevation of the Royal High School.
Unfortunately, the lodge isn't on AP 53. It's the first place I went to. But if we could just look at
Sorry,
CD...
if I could point out to you that Figure 9 does have the lodge in the present-day image, which is 4 years ago.
It does. And that's a further position, quite a long way back in the street from the image we're just looking at.
Yes, but equally, if you were to, and I realise that this needs a little bit of sort of mental arithmetic on the part of everyone else, but if you, I had taken two viewpoints, and this follows on from Mr. Lara's own evidence of from the points at which you would see the Royal High School on this approach from the west, and the 2 points that from my examination of all of the facts and the documentation, historical documentation, were that there were 2 points of maximum reveal, and I've tried. I don't think it's come out particularly well. It may have done in the digital copies, but one is in a blue and the other is in a purple, and they're both roughly from the same position. So there are points where the where indeed the gate lodge would be visible on.
Could I just cut in and ask? Really, the reason for all these questions is simply this: there is no visualization or image, apart from one possible candidate I'll take you to in a moment, which shows how the lodge and the classroom block the north facade. The one that might do is on page 101 of CD 197. And I wanted to check that's your understanding. No doubt other witnesses for the appellants can deal with the matter later in their own expertise. But you did raise the issue of how the lodge, you say, blocks the view of the northern facade, and I can't see that.
What is the reference, sorry, in 197?
Page 101. Well, 197, page 101, it's in the principles.
While that is being looked at, if I could just draw the attention of the inquiry, and I think it comes to the line of examination that came from Ms. Coburn, and it also comes from the precognition of Mr. Lowry, and to a degree the precognition of Mr. Drummond, who relies on Mr. Lowry's evidence. And I think what has become very clear to me, I don't know if it's become clear to the rest of the inquiry, that there is a misunderstanding about what is meant by the West. And
I realise that there is a lot here to say, and I'm sure it can come up for re-examination, but material. You've previously discussed this with other, and I'd like to just deal with one thing and a series of views, and I'm sure the matter can be dealt with later, but time is pressing, and I know you're tired.
Nevertheless, I do wonder if the witness can answer the question.
The answer wasn't being
I wonder if the witness was answering the question. That's the trouble.
Well, I don't know, sir, because he was stopped halfway through.
Mr.
We're certainly trying to.
Perhaps we could look at CD 197, page 101. And this, if you have it, it's your first heritage assessment, the one that contains the 6 essays and the principles. It's a rather charming view of a security van driving through a gate.
Yes, it's page 101 of CD 197.
I'm sure you would say, and you have said, that this illustrates how the lodge blocks the view of the northern facade. And my question to you this morning is that there's quite a small cone of area where that problem occurs. Now, we can't resolve this, as far as I can see, from the papers that are lodged, and it'll be a matter for the reporters when they're next on site to have a little look. But are you aware of any other images that I should be showing you about this issue?
Yes, if we refer to APP 53 figure 7, and even though it doesn't show the gate lodge, it shows a particular line of view which I think I would be using to illustrate the significance of the north elevation, which to a degree we haven't been able to have a discussion on that so far. And that's developing from Mr. Robb's evidence, but I think it is fundamental to this inquiry to understand the significance of that and how the gate lodge interferes with it.
Thank you. I'm sure the reporters can look at figure 7 in APP 53. I'd like to go back to CD 199 and the photographs, and you were at page photograph 4A when we last spoke about them. And I want to leave view 4, and it's behind, and pass through and look at view 6 very briefly. This is on page 53 of CD 197.
Sorry, might I be permitted, it's going back to the previous line of questioning, but I think it's an important issue. If I could, in giving a clear answer to that, view 27 is one that is extremely close to the point that I've identified on the pavement as bit that is reconstructed from the location of what is visible of the Royal High School in terms of the north elevation and the west elevation and the way that is constructed. This is fairly close to that location, which is why it is of extreme importance to the inquiry to understand how the gate lodge then might interfere with views of the north elevation. I'm sorry to raise that, but I think...
I'm very grateful. I should have spotted it myself. It's exactly the right point, and it appears to show that at this particular point, something is going on here, and we can look at the images better, no doubt, with Mr. Van Grieken. But let's return to page 53 and page 6. View 6. You describe the impact here as moderately beneficial. And this is scheme 2. You describe the impact on scheme 1 as moderately beneficial too, and that's CD 49, page 46. Now, my question is, how is it beneficial to block the view of the boundary of the playground, and indeed the step down from Regent Road into the valley at this location? How is that beneficial?
It also changes the current condition, in that the views represent the current condition and the degree to which there are aspects which are detrimental to the setting and the current condition of the Royal High School which are taken into account. There's also the potential impact on something which is changing now, or which is disguised to a degree, which was a building site which was under construction, which related to the Carlton Gate project at the time when these illustrations were taken into account.
So, in essence, your position is that seeing a large hotel wing is better than seeing the Property Service Agency's trees and the construction of Carlton Gate?
And the car parking that goes with the trees, that they were sort of partially meant to disguise.
Even though that involves loss of the ability to appreciate the edge of the site?
I recognise there is some loss that would result from that.
Okay. Can we move on, because I'm conscious of time and pressure? To the next image is view 8. Now, I'm going to propose to pass through views 8A, B, D, C, odd order, but there we are, simply because my assessment is they're not that different from the views that Mr. Mackay discussed the landscape capacity study with you yesterday. So I'm going to pass through those and look at Queen's Drive, which is 9A. And these, again, Mr. Mackay dealt with 9A to a great extent. But the one I wanted to look at, if I just get my notes correctly, because if you turn to 9C, which is on page 69, how are we supposed to assess the impact when both of these images are after images?
It's where that one has to have reliance on what the image portrays.
So they're identical images, and you're using them to demonstrate you've assessed a change, but you haven't given us a before image and after image. You've given us two after images. I'm sure other witnesses can confirm that, but how is it supposed to show your reasoning if it's the same image?
Trying to be clear which image we're referring to.
Page 69 in CD 199.
69. Right.
And I've got a black and white one, so I'm going to open up the colour one that I have on my computer at the same time for absolute clarity. So it's page 69, and I know these aren't technical visualization images because you've explained that before, and I can ask other people about them. But if you look at page 69, do you see that you have a car on the upper image, and then if you look, you can see a white building in the centre of the image. And then at about, if you put a clock in the position of the white building, at around 2 o'clock is the eastern extension for the hotel. And then if you look at the lower image, the same is true. So these are both after images. How are we supposed to see your reasoning without them being different?
I had my microphone on during that session, but what I take to be the case is that the two images are the same from what you described to me.
Yes, they are.
But also, if you look at, even if it were possible to make that view, and I may have made that mistake in not being able to see the difference between the two, which then comes back to the assessment, is that there is very little difference between the two, which sends us back to the value of the asset is low, and what may be deemed to be negligible beneficial will relate to the change to the skyline and the gymnasium building, which no longer appears within that view.
It also takes them back to Mr. Mackay's questions, which I won't revisit, about these not being visualizations. You weren't working off visualizations, you were working off these.
No, that's not true, and I never indicated that. I don't think I indicated that.
You were working off visualizations.
I'm working off visualizations, which are the same as those that appear in the EIA, and I make it very clear in the introductory sections to the HIA that it is very important to look at those particular views so that comparison can be made in detail. I think, as you accepted, the resolution of the images has got to be fairly low, which is why it's very difficult to make any sort of comparison between these two, because they are very largely the same. even with the east wing appearing within that. But I would have used the correct large-scale image, and the high-resolution image in order to make that assessment.
Okay, let's move on to image 12. Sorry, image 12, image 11, and it's image 11A, page 73. This sequence I'm not going to ask about because in very broad terms they were dealt with by Mr. Mackay in talking about the landscape capacity study. But I'm going to go on to 11C, page 81, the Meadowbank lawn. I was struck here by something that I don't understand, and I'm sure you can explain. If you look at 11C, you have a picture of Holyrood Palace and Carlton Hill behind, and it lists a total of 7 Chapter 3 attributes and 8 Chapter 4 attributes. If we flip back to the previous page, which I suppose is further away from the palace, it lists many more attributes. And I didn't understand, and I'm sure you can explain, why attribute 317 is not present, is not listed here. And there are a number of other missing ones, but I thought I'd pick on 317 as an example. So we need to go back to the list of attributes, which I'm looking at in the management plan on CD 488 on electronic page 16.
It would seem to me so that we can debate these points at some length as to what's in and not in the view, but there is a very substantial difference as to what is in the framing of the view between view 11B and view 11C, in that more comprehensively view 11B takes in the major attributes of the World Heritage Site, in that you have the chasm, you have the Old Town on the skyline of that view, you have the Waverley Valley between them. To the foreground you have buildings of extreme importance, which include the Scottish Parliament, the Palace of Holyrood House, and setting aside the tenements on at Abbey Hill on the right-hand side. But this is quite an important view, which reflects also the further views from the west, from St Anthony's Chapel, rather than down on the lawn itself. So it's for that reason primarily, and I will go and answer your point if you require me to on what 3.7.17 means and why it is or is not in that view. But it does seem to me that there's an important overview that one needs to have in order to do that.
I understand that, and I'm not going to go through all of them because we will be here until next week, and I think that will be unhelpful. But 3.17 makes specific reference to the defensive walled medieval city of royal palaces, abbeys, and organically developed burrage plots, or the Old Town. Now, I accept that you can't see the Old Town in 11C, but what you can see is the palace of Holyrood House, and, of course, if you were looking slightly to the right, you would see Holyrood Abbey. So is this another issue of, in a sense, professional judgment, that other people could have a different view about which attributes to include here?
People will always have a different view on these matters, and it's not always possible to get consensus, because these things do come down at the end of the day to professional judgment, and I've never shied away from that.
I understand. Now, what I want to do is move on. If we go back to your CD 199, page 83 is view 16B, and I notice that you've assessed this also as moderate beneficial. And But on the back page, page 84, in the middle of the reasoning section, you've highlighted as a positive thing. You can see the word removed comes about 9 lines down. And it says, the wings do not appear to overpower the former Royal High School at the heart of the plan, and the impact is mitigated by angling the new wings which follow the curved site boundaries, which are now to be preserved in their original state. Now, what I'm struck by is in this view, you're very keen to see site boundaries from the top of Carlton Hill, but in the earlier view, view 6, you didn't think they were that important. Now, that seems to be an inconsistency. Can you help me out explaining why that is?
I think in this view, more of the road and the boundaries are visible than in the previous one.
Okay. I'm passing through 17 and 18 because Miss Innes has asked me to leave those for him, and I'm happy to do so. And look at number 19. Now, this is 19A and 19B. I'm not doing 19C because Mr. Mackay has dealt with that. What I thought I noticed was that you assessed the value of this view as medium, and in scheme 2, and if I can get to the right place, in CD 49 on page 74, not 74, but further on, page 78 is a similar view, it's not quite the same. You assessed the value of the asset as high. And I'm intrigued to know why the value of the asset has dropped between the two schemes.
Sorry, could you give me the precise document reference as the one that you're comparing it with?
Yeah, comparing it with CD 49, which is the earlier heritage statement, page 79.
So is that page 79?
Yes, page 79. So the actual start of that one, start of that one, Mr. Steele, is 78. View 19A of Canongate Church in the scheme 1, and page 89 in CD 199 for view 19A Canongate Church in scheme 2.
I think it's relatively easy to explain. The photograph, which is on page 79, is given by me in trying to redress something which is was certainly caused me concern about what was within the view from anyone standing on. It's one of these questions, I think, more to do with LVIA issues as to what should be within the view, the point at which you see, and I think that was corrected for the views that then appear in the later document having regard to that particular problem. So the definition of where the view occurs was given by the City of Edinburgh Council, and then the photographer had taken a particular view of that when the view was taken for Scheme 1, and that was rectified for Scheme 2. So essentially what I'm addressing here is recognition that there may be limited parts of Carlton Hill which come within that view, but also I'm taking into account the degree to which that this is a passing view on what is a very busy thoroughfare in terms of what you see and what you may perceive as you walk past the Canongate Church, which of course sits between these two images.
So in essence, if one moves 3 metres down the road, the value of the asset is reduced, because that seems to be what you're saying.
No, it's really what is within the view. It comes back to the English Heritage guidance as to how much of the asset that is being described appears within the view, and then to assess that within the view that has been given. But in the knowledge of the sequential movement that occurs of understanding a city within the context of a busy thoroughfare, where the focus of someone moving within the space on the high street may vary from from, say, standing within the Canongate Kirkyard, which is a fixed view position.
Let's move along to the next. Well, let's move down the hill or move up a bit. I'm not sure which way it is. At 19b, the next page in both documents, the same thing appears to have happened. So, in 19b for Scheme 2, it's assessed as medium as value, and 19b in Scheme 1 is assessed as high. Now, it's a long time since John Lowry taught me the picturesque, but it strikes me that the view in 19b is pretty picturesque. We've got the Burns Monument, we've got Carlton Hill, we've got the end of Regent Terrace, we've got the grave of someone I ought to know who he is, and we've got part of the gymnasium block. Would you not see that as a high-value asset? Or is it just that one moves a little bit to the right and it drops to medium?
I prefer to have regard to the view which appears in the second document for Scheme 2 as being representative of what is seen. I think we've agreed that there's an adjustment made between Scheme 1 and 2 that rectified images as a result of, I suppose, representations that I made in terms of what is seen, which appears on page 79.
So given that the reporters and Scottish ministers have to assess Scheme 1 as a standalone scheme as part of an appeal, should we give less weight to your assessments for Scheme 1 because there's been an exercise to correct the images between the two schemes?
I wouldn't necessarily say so, because the number of images that have needed to be changed are relatively few within the overall framework of the document, and others can give evidence to that rather better than I.
Appreciate that. It did strike me that there is a difference between the two images here, is that one of them appears to be a summer image and one a winter image, but I will deal with that with Mr. Van Grieken when we get to him. In due course. Can I pass through 19C, because Mr. Mackay has dealt with that, and pass through all of 21, because I think Mr. Innes will deal with that, and leave out 22 and 23 because they're very similar to the view from North Bridge, and we've discussed, Mr. Mackay discussed that view with you in terms of the landscape capacity study. And that brings us to view 27 on page 107, which you've already drawn to my attention. And I think I'll need to come back to that in a little bit when I deal with some principles. I again think it's appropriate simply to ask in the context of the next one, 27B. I appreciate that the building in Scheme 2 in the West Wing is not a tower of civic presence. Perhaps it's more of a compact wing of civic presence. But I fail to see, and I'm giving you the opportunity to explain this, how either building from this location can be better, can be a beneficial change, other than the fact that it involves chopping down those terrible trees. Can you explain that?
I think I have explained it on page 110 of the document.
And that is because the new wing does not appear to be overscaled compared in relation to the landscape, and is framed in a pleasing manner. You accept that's a matter of professional judgment?
Yes, I accept that.
I want to make sure I finish this section without missing anything out. Is in relation to view 30, all the view 32s, particularly view 32D on page 123. View looking down Carlton Hill Terrace towards St Andrew's House. And in Scheme 2, you can't see the end of St Andrew's House, and any view you might have had of the new town Old Town is gone. and you assess this as a minor adverse change. Would you say that it's a matter of judgment, professionally or otherwise, as to whether you're right?
I've already made it clear to the inquiry that these are matters of professional judgment, but my judgment is informed by the fact that this is part of a sequence, and those who've been on this route most likely will have been on the top of the hill to get the full appreciation. They might even have gone up to the top of Nelson's Tower to look down on the site with the grass roof and to see the Stevenson's Road going through and see a new Carlton Gate which is being formed, but also see all of the views which are to be to be enjoyed. There will be a glimpse of this as you come down, and I think it's important to draw to the attention of the reporters that there is a section on Carlton Hill Drive as you come down which relates to the whole consideration of the importance of the north retaining wall and the gap between that and the north elevation of the Royal High School, because that provides, it is surprisingly level, and you end up with a horizontal line which you'll see in the previous view. This is what I'm taking into account in terms of that sequence of views. And if one were to look at view 32C, because I cannot look at view 32D without looking at the other views within that sequence, you'll see that horizontal length of pavement, and the fact that rather deliberately, having regard to the fact that Hamilton had reshaped the hill to what his needs were, it provides a vantage point by which you do see the north elevation of the building. But not only that, you experience the temple, albeit at some short distance away from the viewpoint, but then to either side of the temple you will see also the important landscape and the features which someone moving down that sequence of views will be able to enjoy. So in a sense, it's a platform, it's a raised platform by which it's possible to do that, where the Hamilton building sits beneath that, and then you continue down your journey. So that is part of my professional judgment, that the view that you're referring to is in relation to that sequence of movement from the top of the hill.
You will recollect on the site visit that we walked, all of us, up the drive and turned at various points, and I think Mr. Gibb pointed out to everybody the heights of various buildings, so the reporters have the benefit of that experience themselves. Can we move on to a new topic, and the final large one? Could you turn to CD 197, your first document for Scheme 2, page 97, the conservation strategy? Sirs, I have one largish topic and then a couple of very small things, and I was proposing to start this, and then the moment Mr. Wright feels he would like a break, to stop, because there isn't a natural break now, and this is a bit early to stop for an afternoon break.
That sounds right to me, given that we've already had a break this afternoon. Mr. Wright, are you okay for the moment?
I'm certainly okay for the moment,
okay.
So I seem to have found some sort of second wind.
Excellent, excellent. Just let us know when you'd like a break then.
Now, Mr. Wright, you have explained, and you've explained it many times, how you've carried out an exercise over the summer and autumn of 2014 and produced a conservation issues assessment. I don't think we have it, but you produced it, and ultimately you produced these principles. And you tell us these principles have informed the development. And I want to check a number of issues with them. I'm not going to deal with all of them because some of them are uncontroversial. And so if we could start with Principle 1, what I thought I'd do in order to minimise the possibility of wasting time is, because they're quite short, I would read them out and then ask you a question. And that might make it easier for everyone to follow it. So if we look at the bottom of page 97, Principle 1, a high-quality conservation scheme carried out to exemplary conservation standards should be delivered based on research, evaluation, enhanced knowledge and full understanding of the significance of the historic fabric that has survived across the site. Now, do you accept that much of what, in terms of scale, was produced and is continued to be produced by those instructing you was produced before this exercise in research, enhanced knowledge and full understanding took place.
Sorry, could you repeat the question? Do I accept
Do you accept that
this is written after?
In fact, you were involved after others decided, in terms of scale and quantum, what they wanted to build here?
Yes, I think it's worth giving this quotation to say that it's perceived as a conservation benefit, and it is something which is a principle which should guide the scheme. So it relates to what I've given to or offered to the inquiry in my inquiry report, which comes from the definition of what conservation is within a heritage management setting, and if that could be agreed, this relates directly to that.
I understand. Let's move on to number 2. The Royal High School building, one of the city's most prominent redundant structures in terms of its architectural and historical significance, should be removed from the Buildings at Risk Register for Scotland and returned to compatible long-term sustainable use. Now, you are aware there is an alternative consented scheme, but beyond that, you are aware of that, so I think there's even a question. I think you know that's the case.
I don't think there's any question about that. No.
The next one. In 3, in returning the building to use, the significance of the internal space of the historic building at the heart of the scheme should be restored. And there's no disagreement about that. Number 4, the extensive alterations carried out in the late 20th century, deemed to be harmful to the authenticity of Hamilton's original design as executed, should be reversed where appropriate, and the original layouts and fabrics, presently hidden, restored to view. Now, if you want to do that, why does your scheme, as ultimately constructed after the workshops, have a flat floor in the assembly hall when I'm not sure what the right word is, but that sunken area is part of the peristyle, it's part of the character of that space. So you seem to have missed that out. It seems to breach your principle. How do you deal with that?
Well, these are not precise as to which bits of fabric. There would need to be an assessment of what's involved in establishing It's always a matter of balance as to what, in terms of conservation gains, of what might be lost and what would have to be changed, having regard to the overall significance. But it seems to me that it's perfectly possible on the principle, the good principle, conservation principle of reversibility, to be able to ensure that that sunken pit remains beneath any floor that would be put in that particular space. But I think what is being referred to here primarily is not that, of which obviously has some significance in its own right. But the space had changed, and what it will never be again is a school hall, and part of the joy of the earlier photographs is looking at the benches, the long benches within that space. That was sort of part of the character. But what it is possible to do is to restore the pedimented doorway right at the southern end of the hall and to put back what was in Hamilton's original arrangement. I suspect there's little disagreement about the benefit of that.
We move on to Conservation Principle 5. Conservation benefits should extend to enhancing the setting of adjoining listed buildings and also the design landscape and the monuments of Carlton Hill. This should be achieved without causing harm to the wider conservation area or outstanding useful value of the World Heritage Site. Now, ignoring the statement of uncontroversial policy in there, is there any particular reason this policy doesn't reference the Hamilton building? It just deals with everything else?
No, it might be deemed to be an omission, but the omission shouldn't be regarded as being something that has been overlooked necessarily, as something where there is an intention to deceive. That is set out very clearly in policy and guidance, and I think what the inquiry needs to bear in mind, I know we've had discussion on is the status of this particular document when it was produced, that it was produced at the end of the design workshop process, so it marks a point in time and it relates to other documents that were being produced at that time. So in a sense it is no more than that, and all of these points would have to be tested very thoroughly in terms of policy and guidance. What this doesn't do is set out the policy and the guidance, because that is set out elsewhere in the heritage statement and in some detail and at some length. And it would seem to me that that is an entirely reasonable approach under the circumstances.
Yeah, thank you. Moving on to number 6. I don't think that I have any questions for you about number 6. It seems uncontroversial, so I shall move on to number 7. Public realm improvements and the landscaping of the site should seek to resolve issues surrounding the set of access to Carlton Hill, so as it is within the power. So much as it is within the power of the applicants to do this, and enhance the approach to and from Waterloo Place as one of the set pieces completing the planning of the first new town. Now, is this the Tower of Civic Presence? That's the principle that allows for it to take place?
Absolutely not. This relates to a series of discussions which are being held throughout the entire workshop process, and in a sense it reflects an ambition not only of the applicant, the appellants, but a general knowledge. And I think just by looking at all of the views, we've been through all of the views at great length which relate to Waterloo Place, but if you look at the standard of the public realm on Waterloo Place, the standard of the buses that are parked there, the cars that are parked there, the width of the pavements, and also the amenity value of moving through that space, by the time you get to the gates of the portal of the Royal High School, you're at great risk of being knocked over by a bus which is turning a circle, a service bus which has finished its journey from West Lothian, has parked and then turns round to go back again. It was recognised very strongly by the city really as one of the benefits that comes out of the Block 10 development brief, that there would be opportunities for improving the public realm. So essentially what this is doing is recognising the accessibility to the building and also to the hill, and animating that space which would be of major public benefit. That's essentially what it relates to.
But would you agree that if all of that was done, and at the same time either the Tower of Civic Presence in Scheme 1 or the Little Tower of Civic Presence, perhaps less presence, the Tower of Transitory Civic Presence was built instead, that would be a major change to the end of that view? I mean, even if it doesn't affect the setting, even if we argue about the scoring, it's still a big difference, isn't it?
Yes, but we're referring to here to something which is essentially the public realm at that point. And it deals also the difference between it starts here, the public realm improvements and landscape. Sorry, I haven't finished. If I may continue with giving you the response that I meant to do. It starts very clearly here. This is public realm and improvements, and I would just reiterate the advice given to the inquiry that this is a matter that was deemed to be of some significance. Now, clearly the difference between Scheme 1 and Scheme 2 in respect to public realm is very much, it changes, because one of the benefits that comes from Scheme 2 is that it preserves the gates and the railings and puts further railings back to the Royal High School, and that is seen most undoubtedly as a conservation benefit that came out of the review process in early 2016. So I say these are points in time. There's principles to be developed and to be considered where it's appropriate to do so.
This one deals with public realm. 8, the next one. Scheme proposal should explore the potential to improve the spatial relationship with St Andrew's House and to frame the view of the Salisbury Crags and Arthur Seat effectively on the approach from Waterloo Place. Is this one about building the Tower of Civic Presence and creating a framed view at the critical point?
I do have to say, sir, I take the strongest exception to your notion of the Tower of Civic Presence.
Well, that's what it's called in the evidence from the architects.
I accept that, and my apologies for it. It seemed to be rather like the Propylaea to the Parthenon. It was something that was being repeated at regular times, and it was, to me at least, becoming irksome and within that context.
I will stop doing it, and I will move on to the next one, which is number 9. Now, This deals with public access to the building, and I think I'd better ask someone who knows about running hotels about public access to the building, so I'll move on to 10. Now, this is the retaining wall, and you've described it here as the impressive retaining wall to the rear of the site, an integral component of Hamilton's original design, should be revealed and conserved together with the Belvedere Tower at the far corner, which is presently smothered by the classroom gymnasium block of 1885-1896. My question is this: why, in the previous principles in CD 49, why is it not smothered, it's just hidden? And why wasn't it integral before, and now it's integral? Because if you look on CD 49, on page 94, your rhetoric is perhaps a little different.
Because I'm forming an increased public professional opinion, I think, on the value of from having carried out further research between schemes 1 and 2 on the potential value or the harm that's caused by the gymnasium building, especially on that particular element, and understanding that in rather greater detail than I may have done for scheme 1.
So you wouldn't agree with me that those instructed me that the eastern wing of the proposed hotel, either of them rather smothers the Belvedere and wall?
Absolutely not, because there's a very clear gap between the two.
If we could move on to the conservation strategy. This is written, the first one, 11, options for addressing how additional accommodation is to be provided to the west and east of the Royal High School building, brackets, on the areas of the former open playground space, should not exclude a carefully balanced design for any wings which may be proposed, and should have regard to the potential impact on the wider historic environment. Now, I'm not going to rise to the change of extensions to wings, because Mr. Mackay dealt with that, but I wondered why in the previous principles in CD 49 it wasn't a carefully balanced scheme, it was just a balanced scheme. Is it that you're increasing the fervency of your principles in order to deal with public objection?
I wouldn't say that that's the case at all. I think to balance something very carefully surely has to be an advantage rather than a presumption that it gives a solution that is being sought.
And so would you agree that Scheme 1 lacked care in that respect?
No, I wouldn't. It is simply a point in a journey between Scheme 1 and Scheme 2, and if one bears in mind the purpose of the review exercise early in 2016 was one which was delivered and arranged primarily for conservation reasons. It's quite clear that that was the case, and that was the brief that was set for that purpose, having regard to the reasons for refusals and matters relating to the scale and massing of the hotel wings.
Let's move on to number 12. And this may simply be a grammatical oversight, and I am not the best grammatician, so no doubt you'll correct me. It's rather long, and it reads, questions of the potential impact of development on the Royal High School building, including considerations of form, massing, materials, should be subject always to the overriding considerations of the overall quantum of development, and any new development proposed should not overpower the dominance of the original building. So in what way was the scheme that you are supporting, either the first scheme rather, subject to the overriding considerations of the quantum of development?
You're asking me the extent to which they may differ between schemes 1 and 2.
No, we're starting at the point in scheme 1 where you're applying a slightly different principle, because the scheme in scheme 1, which is on page 94 of 049, mentions extensions, so we can ignore that as a minor change, and has a slight change at the end where it talks about overpowering the original building rather than overpowering its dominance. But why is Scheme 1, how was Scheme 1 subject to the overriding consideration of the overall quantum of development?
Can I ask which document you're referring to? You referred to CD 049, which is not the
yes.
case. It has to be 047, does it not?
Sorry.
If we're comparing like with like?
You're right, it's CD 047.
I have CD 049 in front of me, but I don't think that's the document you
It isn't. Perhaps if you look at 047, because that is the right document. That's the heritage assessment for Scheme 1. So my question is, if you look at Principle 12, you have asserted as a conservation strategy principle that questions of the impact of the development of the Royal High School building, but not on the development of anything else, seemingly, including considerations of form, massing and materials, should be subject always to the overriding considerations of the overall quantum of development. How was that done in Scheme 1?
Done through the workshop process, the design workshop process during 2014 and in the months thereafter, and as is described in some length in the section. I think this is really a matter that ought to be addressed more properly by the architects to whom this question should be put.
Except you were present in the workshop process, and it is the position of Edinburgh World Heritage. They repeatedly said that the developers were trying to get too much quantum development on the site. And this principle seems to be saying that you can cause more impact because of the overriding consideration of the overall quantum development. Now, one reading of that would be, it's all right to cause more impact because we need to build a big hotel. And I want to see what you understand this to mean, because you wrote it.
My understanding of it is that and it's referred to consistently in the way in which the impact is addressed in Part 1, and that is CD048, and Part 2, CD048, and Part 3 for the first scheme, in which I make it, I think, really quite clear that my view is that there is an impact that results from the quantum of development in heritage terms, and I do make that quite clear that there are issues that relate to the design, and that is my professional judgment on that. That professional judgment then changes for Scheme 2 on account of the workshops that take place early in 2016, which look at these issues afresh.
You have explained that, but despite that, you still supported Scheme 1 and you supported Scheme 2, even though elsewhere you've said that you felt that it was optimal, the West Wing was optimally one floor too high, and that was discussed with Mr. Mackay, and I don't want to go back. The purpose of the question is simply to say here, should this principle not be read as an assertion that the need for an enabling development justifies higher levels of impact and detriment caused by this development?
I repeat what I said earlier, that these things are always a balance and they have to be within the planning system.
Let's move on to number 13. Before we leave this one, do you see at the end of 12 in 0047 the last four words overpower the original building? And at the end of 12 in CD 197, that's page 99, it's not overpower the dominance of the original building. What's the purpose of dominance in that sentence? Why is it there?
I think it reflects the prominence of the Royal High School within its setting, and comes out a greater understanding of that in the development of the work done and the research carried out for the second version of the Heritage Statement. And I think it has been acknowledged that there are chapters that are different between Scheme 1 and Scheme 2 that reflect that.
One way this change happened was that the landscape capacity study generated information about the ability of the landscape to absorb development, which then Scheme 2 exceeds.
That, sir, is only one of the factors. There are a number of factors that come into it.
Let's move on to number 13. Could you return to Scheme 2? Because it's just slightly easier to work off Scheme 2, I think. That's CD 197, page 99, factor number 13. Now, this seems to be...
Sir, could I just request a short break?
So I do wonder how much longer it's fair for the witness to continue. It's quite clear that he's tiring, even if he doesn't realise that himself. It's entirely a matter for you.
I'm more than happy to assist the witness by explaining what's coming, so you can take a view. I'm going to go to the end. I'm going to go to the end of the principles. Actually, as you know, there are 29 of them, so we're about halfway through, just short of that. I'm then going to look a little bit at the changes from Scheme 1 to Scheme 2, but not very much. And then I have a couple of topics at the end about the World Heritage Site and its status. I'm not expecting to be more than half an hour from now. I'm obviously very happy to have a break when anyone ever wants one.
You will be complete half an hour from now.
I'm not. Depends how long the answers are, but yes, that's my plan.
Okay. Happy, Mr. Wright, to have a 15-minute break and then take half an hour to complete this line of cross.
Yes, I have no objection to that. So
Perfect.
Thank you.
Okay, let's break now until 3:45.
Of responding to the impact of the bedroom wings on the setting of the listed building.
So if we move on within 14 to the need not to break the skyline. Now, I'm hoping that the very efficient people from CMF hasn't taken away the large visualizations document, because we now need that. And if I could ask you to get yours open and to turn it to view by my own page. View 7. No, not view 7. View 11. From St Anthony's Chapel.
I don't mean to object to this, but and in all the circumstances we are trying to make progress here, and I wonder if these questions could be put to Mr. Van Grieken about his document.
Well, Mr. Steele, they are in fact questions about Mr. Wright's principle, and this is just a large image to look at. I felt it was easier to look at a big image than a small one.
And if before, Mr. Wright, if you don't feel qualified to answer, please say.
What I'd like to look at is towards the end, and it is view VP11A_3. It's the one where, for visual context only, and I'm not asking a technical question, the Scheme 1 image is above the Scheme 2.
Yes, I have that. Yep.
Now, I'm going to ask Mr. Van Grieken about this, or someone else may, about what this image shows, but would you accept that it's worth asking the question as to whether the 2015 proposal breaches the skyline of Carlton Hill in the western extension or wing?
Yes, it does. Yes.
And in Scheme 2, which is lower down, it may be more debatable, and I want to ask Mr. Van Grieken, but I see through the top floor of the 2017 Scheme 2 Western Extension, I see sky. Now, I may be wrong, and it's a technical thing, but how have you interpreted that particular image, bearing in mind the evidence about the landscape capacity study we had yesterday?
I would need to know the extent to which this may differ from the images that were prepared for the environmental statement on which I would have based my reasoning. I cannot say to the inquiry whether this differs or would have any material effect on the judgment I might have formed in the Heritage Impact Assessment.
Thank you. So I think I'll change my... You would accept that in respect of Scheme 1, this principle is breached. I realise it says desirably not, but is certainly engaged. And in respect of Scheme 2, I need to ask some questions of Mr. Van Grieken about this issue. Is that a fair reading of how this principle is engaged, just looking at those particular images?
Apologies, I had the microphone on. I'm sure what would have been taken into account and why the timing of when these images are taken are always slightly difficult in terms of whether the extent to which the St James Centre is there and the impact that may have on the skyline also. And this brings us back to the matter of cumulative effect of development seen one in conjunction with the other.
But as far as you understand, in general terms, from your knowledge of the project and being involved in the change from Scheme 1 to Scheme 2, you think that Scheme 1 breached the skyline in that location?
It does clearly breach the skyline in that location. But I think going back to what I said before, I would need to see the image in the environmental statement rather than this one to see if they were any different as a result of the manner in which this has been represented.
Certainly. Well, why don't we go to 0049? I'll have to get mine up on my screen as well. And that's going to be in the 70s. I suspect the correct image is uh, 11A on page 64. But please correct me if you think it should be a different image.
No, that is the same image as far as I can tell.
Sorry. It may be a good idea to look at CD30 as well. Image 11A. Pages aren't numbered, but it's figure 13.4. If we start, sorry, do you have a 11A from in front of you?
Yes, I do. Yeah.
If we start from the left, there are two vertical structures, one of which I think might be Viscount Melville on the skyline. There's a crane, I think that is, and then there's Viscount Melville standing on his column, and then St Andrew's House with its central tower. And then we see the western wing.
That's correct. In the environmental statement, you'll also see there is a grey line, which is roughly the height of the drum of the tower in Scheme 1, which is no longer in the image, which again reflects the part of the St James complex which has been demolished, bearing in mind that it is a very complex, three-dimensional, not on plan set of structures. And having studied that, obviously, and carried out the heritage statement for that particular site, I am particularly familiar with it. And having taken long-distance views in terms of working out the impact of that on the horizon, and then having regard to the characteristic general height, agreed with the city as to what would replace it as development, I think that reflects that process. So I would have had much less concern about the image that appears in the environmental statement compared with the one which has now been prepared by Mr. Van Grieken, which is carried out to the LVA standards. But it does reflect a change in the cityscape between one time and another.
In that case, I think I could probably cut through everything and simply rephrase the whole thing this way. Let's imagine that on Monday morning you had been asked, what is your understanding of whether Scheme 1 breaks the skyline in that area, based on the fact that you've presumably looked at lots of images over the last few years, and you did the review, when you started the review, for example, did you think that Scheme 1 broke the skyline there?
I would agree that it breaks it only very marginally.
Well, I will take these matters up with Mr. Van Grieken, or someone else will, and that's very helpful. Let's move on to descriptor and descriptor principle 15, which is in designing, and this is back to CD 197, page 99, and in designing any new development to the former Royal High School site, consideration should be given to ensuring the views of the temple corresponding to the functions of the former assembly hall are not impaired. And passing over the fact this may explain why I asked you a question about temples earlier on, again, does anything particular turn on the reference to, again, nothing particular turns on the change from extensions or extension to development? That's simply a change in tone.
Yes, that's correct.
So if we move on to number 16, which is, there should be a strong presumption against perforating the blind walls of Hamilton's monumental design for the principal street elevation to Regent Road with new openings, or by creating new circulations route through it, unless it can be achieved without being intrusive and without damaging the authenticity of Hamilton's original design. Now, I have a simple question, which is, this principle, which those interacting me entirely agree with, doesn't it make turning this building into a hotel rather more of an architectural challenge?
Yes, it did, and that was recognised by Gareth Hoskins at quite an early date in the process, that it was always his belief that it would need to be an amalgamation of entrances, and to have introduced one on Regent Road would have animated the facade, and that is where he and I, over time, would have developed differing viewpoints to the necessity of doing that, and an encouragement to find alternatives that might reflect the manner in which the building had been designed for the site originally, with the approach from the west.
Again, 17, likewise there should be a strong presumption against the erection of the new structures forward of the walls or the principal elevation of the building. And I'm assuming you mean the principal elevation is the front where you have the central temple and the colonnade and the two wings.
Yes, that's correct.
And again, if it's a complex answer, I think I'm probably not going to make you enjoy this, but Mr. Leslie's assertion that the building should be pushed back, is that related to this principle, or is it further back than that?
It's totally unrelated.
In that case, I will move on. Number 18. Interventions proposed to the principal facades seen from Regent Road should be capable of being justified as being absolutely essential to the operation of the building and kept to the minimum. Proposals for intervention should be preceded by detailed measured survey work to fully understand the level of impact on the historic facade. Now, I don't want to get into discussion about the music school because I'm conscious that Mr. Innes has to do that, and I think it's better if he does it. I wanted to ask about servicing the hotel. So you've explained in your documentation how in Scheme 1 there was proposed to be almost a vehicle entrance that was to be big enough to reverse a van into, and had a copper surround, and was marked as adverse, I think moderate adverse in your assessment. And it involved removing the last original door in the building. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And I think, in fact, you discovered that that door has on it the last original ironwork in the building, because there's nothing that enthused the PSA more than destroying all the ironwork.
That's correct. They managed to miss that one.
So, in terms of history and understanding and the meaning and legacy of the building, it's quite an important door because it's something that needs to be preserved and protected. Would you agree with that?
Yes, and hence this conservation principle should make that quite clear.
And I suppose it's authentic, that door.
I agree it has high levels of authenticity.
This brings me to the use that door is proposed to be made in Scheme 2. You're aware that it's going to be used for all non-guest access to the hotel?
Yes, I am, yes.
And that would involve the moving in through that door of all laundry, food, drink, waste, contractors, staff. I'm running out of things to say, but that's...
Yes, it would need to do that.
And all of us, in fact, this probably applies to everyone in this room, all of us who end up working in corporate buildings, not least courts, know that the service doors of these buildings, they suffer a lot of wear and tear from things bashing into them. And is it really a good idea to have the most authentic door in the building being opened and shut by having laundry trolleys pushed through it?
It may have to be that. It's not different to the way in which many hotels are serviced within for instance, the new town or the old town areas. But I'm not encouraging the inquiry to look into that necessarily. But I do suspect that I'm not best qualified to answer that point in terms of the volume of traffic going through. That might be a question to be put to the architects, if I could suggest.
Yes, if I may respectfully suggest, I know that other witnesses are in a position to answer detailed questions about that very issue, which we'd anticipated.
I'm delighted, but I'm merely concerned. If it's such a important door, why haven't you recommended it be removed and the opening be surrounded in copper, like in Scheme 1, because that at least would protect the opening?
I would prefer not to try and do that, and there may be quite subtle ways in which of doing it that allows the door to be preserved in its original form. That might be part of the detailed development design, but I think in terms of the planning application, it's not unreasonable to assume that the door would be kept and that is the basis on which the application would be considered.
And this principle and the earlier one at principle 16 are probably two quite problematic ones for the design of a hotel on this site, in this building.
I don't believe that 16 necessarily is that, because it will be quite possible to gain access as the building was approached originally through the west playground and through the gates that exist, which may need to be modified for the traffic going through. That would be accepted. There's no different to the other consented scheme in that respect.
And I suppose, is there also not the odd issue that in the workshops there was some discussion of opening windows in the main portico from the assembly hall, which thankfully aren't there anymore, and that's a compromise that's had to be made to the operation of the hotel?
No, it was thought to be desirable to have that, but in terms of the levels of intervention after consideration, it was agreed that it was not sensible to proceed with that in terms of damaging the significance of the portico area. So for the avoidance of any doubt, it would be a question of putting that back as it was, fully intended, internally and externally. And bearing in mind it is not possible to get through that door at all onto the portico, that this would be something that would be rectified in the design proposals.
Thank you. If I could move on to number 19. Now this is rather long. When considering the form and location of any new development, change from extensions, at the former Royal High School site, its potential impact on long-distance views should not be evaluated in isolation of other key historical views towards Carlton Hill. For instance, from the ramparts of the castle and from the sequence of the views seen from Dante's Chapel and Hollywood Park, or from the Cannon Gate. In considering the views from the chapel and the park, the potential impact of the removal of the modern St James's complex from the skyline and the replacement scheme for it should be considered in terms of potential cumulative effect. Is this simply, particularly the last few words which are added for Scheme 2, simply to reflect the fact that St James had happened?
No, I think we always knew St James would happen, because bear in mind that there's a gap between when planning permission was granted and listed building consent and whatever else for that particularly large scheme, and the time given the recession when the work would actually start on site. So in a sense, I suppose I'm privileged in having the knowledge of what was consented and the process that the design team went through in terms of setting the height of that development. So this would tend to reflect that level of knowledge.
Number 20 is about the viewpoints being agreed with the council, and I'm not proposing to ask about that. I think we've covered it. 21. Alterations should be designed to have minimal impact on the historic fabric and the integrity of Hamilton's original design, over which the maximum of Article 3 of the Borough Charter should be followed, changing as much as is necessary but as little as possible. Now, if I put to you that these changes that you have approved of, you are saying they are necessary in order to find a permanent use for that building, and they are as little as can be done. Have I got that right? That's effectively what you've been doing as the heritage consultant on this project.
This is part of the mitigation strategy, and the success or otherwise of that in relation to the scheme is set out succinctly in Part 2 of the Heritage Statement in terms of the direct impacts on the fabric of the principal listed building here.
Thank you. So if evidence was accepted by the reporters or Scottish ministers that there were alternative uses that cause little less change and still enable the building to be saved, that principle can still be complied with by a smaller, less intrusive project, couldn't it?
I think it depends on the project to which you're referring. There may be other projects which are not being described here which could meet that requirement, but they're not under consideration for the inquiry.
It's worth saying at this point that if it wasn't for the fact that Mr. Innes and the Preservation Trust were here, I would now launch into hours of questions about this, but I'm not going to. I'll leave that topic to Mr. Innes because no doubt he'll deal with his own scheme. But you understand that the World Heritage Trust and the Conservation and the Coburn Association and the Community Council believe that the music school scheme is such a scheme that is less intrusive and would save the building. Do you understand that? Move on to 22. When considering alterations to the exterior of the former Royal High School building and any new development proposed to the site, consideration should be given to the hierarchy imposed by Hamilton's original design regarding the elevation to Regent Road, the outer faces to the west and east wings, and the rear facade facing Carlton Hill, which might be expected to accommodate the greatest amount of change for achieving improved circulation, provided this allows the circulation patterns and principal rooms of the Hamilton's original design to be preserved. So can I check one thing? You think there's a hierarchy imposed by Hamilton's design that starts with the principal elevation, works around the signs and ends up on the rear facade?
No, it's more subtle than that. I'm not saying that here. I'm saying that at the end of the workshop process and in the discussions that had taken place, I think one of the matters that cannot be addressed in great detail in this inquiry is that the things that we're talking about essentially are the direct impacts of the building on the fabric, which are mostly to do with external matters. But we cannot divorce consideration of the internal layouts as designed by Hamilton as having less interest, even though they've been changed by the PSA. The basic sort of layout of the building is still there. So we have to respect that, and things like the enfilade of rooms that are part of that plan, because it's intrinsic to how the building appears three-dimensionally. You cannot consider one thing without the other. So essentially this is accepting that there would have to be change of some sort given the brief that is being accommodated here, so that it's a balance of conservation benefits against some conservation loss or some sort of impact, and trying to find what the right solution is there. But I think what it does take us on very neatly to, and I really don't want to extend the session, but I think it's a hugely important point, and it hasn't really come out, because there's been a focus on the individual elevations about what is on the south and what is on the west. There's been some consideration of combinations of elevations, which returns us to the notion of a front and a flank being in view, which is the stark dictum which comes in here. But that dictum applies equally to the relationship between the west elevation and the rear elevation. So you've got, it isn't just one elevation being more important than another, it's the way in which you read that, and that is why I've drawn attention in APP 53 to the points at which you would see that to best advantage.
But you are saying that because of the nature of these rooms with the enfilades, in order to make this work as a hotel, some form of added northern corridor, however it's designed, has to be provided, because you can't use the rooms as corridors. Am I right?
That is certainly the way in which the scheme has developed, and the architects have coped with that particular requirement. The main issue to be considered, having regard to those views of the front and the flank, is how much of that is seen in appreciating those views of the north elevation, and whether that is appropriate in that these glazed links sit between the pavilions, and it is the temple form of the assembly hall which steps forward in relation to that. So as you capture that view, this open view, with the gate lodge having been lost now on the rise, that is what you see. And it's also what you look down onto from Carlton Hill Drive.
I don't want to go into a complete back to this topic again, but am I right in saying that your view is that the view you see up the vehicle access route from the gates in Scheme 2, or from the repositioned gates in Scheme 1, up to where the cars will stop outside the portico on the north facade, is open? That's your understanding of the design?
I wonder if my friend really meant that, stopping outside the portico.
The north portico. Or north facade, even. Again, this time I'll get it right. Do you mean to say that when a vehicle comes up the vehicle access road from over the site of where currently the lodge is, to access the north facade and the pedestrian entrance to the building for guests, that space between the retaining wall on one side and the new west wing on the other side, and then the extensions, then the glazed links and the Hamilton building, you see that space as open, and a view that is open?
Yes, I see it as a view which is, obviously that view will be closed off where the wings, because of the kidney shape, on the far side of the central nucleus of the building, where that comes back. But the critical thing is the gap. It's the gap between the two, and that is something that will be seen and appreciated from some distance from the site, even before entering it, which takes us back to that position on the west side of Regent Road in order to appreciate that.
This point, is this a good point to remember on the site visit, the moment when Mr. Gibb was able to explain to all of us who were there the two different ways that the wings, particularly the west wing, join to the Hamilton building? Do you recollect that description? I don't know whether reporters do.
Yes, but it may be wise for Mr. Gibb for him to give evidence to his design on that.
I'm sure he will, but I just wanted to make sure people remember that moment. Let's just jump ahead and look at Descriptor 28, because it's probably worth doing it now rather than moving around. Descriptor 28 is careful consideration should be given to the removal of the 1578 armorial panel inserted into the building fabric of 1879, and to the arrangements for its removal, temporary storage, future public display, and to making good the damage to the masonry resulting from its removal. Now, my simple question is this: that wouldn't be necessary if you didn't build the glazed corridors, would it?
No, it may not be, but it is really how prominent that armorial panel is, and whether there is a better location for it.
But if we wish to retain authenticity, we would leave it where it was.
Yes, as part of the history of the building, I would accept that.
Let's go back to Descriptor 24. So in order, not 24, 23, no, 25, sorry, I've got where I was at. 25, nearly there. Opportunities should be sought to remedy the damage to the integrity of Hamilton's design of the internal spaces as a consequence of the alterations for the proposed Scottish Assembly for the late 1970s, ensuring always that the full extent and impact of these changes has been carefully understood in the absence of detailed drawings by the Property Service Agency having survived. The fabric should be fully recorded prior to these changes being effected. Now, I don't think anyone is going to disagree with that. So let's move on to the final one, 26. Consideration should be, not final one, but 26, on that page. Consideration should be given to the removal of the ancillary buildings on the site associated with the expansion of the school from the late 19th century to mid-20th centuries, where they interfere with a full appreciation of Hamilton's Royal High School design, and for which appropriate justification for their loss is provided under historical environment legislation and policy guidance. Now, my question is simple. If, as you've said, and I can take you to this, but I think you're going to accept this, if, as you said, the classroom block, the gymnasium, the lunch block, the lodge, the PSA trees, the parking, all of which damage the setting of the Hamilton building, and I think you said that on a number of occasions, if that's true, surely building two big hotel wings each side of it damages, in roughly the same place, damages the setting of the Hamilton building.
Yes, it would change the setting. Whether it damages it is a matter of professional opinion. And what I have sought to do is to balance that against the gains that would certainly follow, which I would see as conservation benefits. And what drives this, to a degree, is that there's been very little disagreement, I think, amongst the parties in relation to really what the international value of this building is. I think to be able to recover that, and I think the loss of the gymnasium is a very good example of that, because it's certainly my view that the retaining wall is part of that original design. So anything that restores that concept increases our potential to understand the site better than we do.
And in Scheme 2, you succeeded in bringing back some of those features, and they're referenced in Principle 27, the boundary walls. So we move on to that. Subject to achieving the wider conservation benefits listed above, the boundary walls, railings and entrance gates, as designed by Hamilton, should be preserved. Now that's where it stops in Scheme 1, but then you go on. Further, having regard to the evidence of historic photographs and drawings, consideration should be given to reinstating the missing elements of the design where they reinforce the integrity of the original concept. Now, did you hear that? Because I realised your microphone was on. Right, wonderful. I will simply ask this question. If integrity of the original concept is important, how does sticking a hotel wing in each playground, whether it's a Tower of Civic anything or not, how does that reinforce integrity of Hamilton's vision of a temple on a gentle rise?
It's for all the reasons that are explained in the build-up to this point, and in measuring the impact, which relate to finding a sustainable use for the building.
And we'll move on to 29. Recording of the internal... And I don't think anyone's going to disagree with 29, so I'm not even going to read it out. Now, that's me finished with the principles and putting the points I needed to put to you. But I want to ask a couple of questions about what isn't there. Why is there no principle that the height of the new elements, that is the new wings, should be restricted to below the ridge height of the wings of the main pavilion? You'll remember that from when I started, from the 2009 projects and the long linear building that we found on page 11 of EW18. Why is there no principle of that sort?
It's because thinking had moved on from that point. And that is what was reflected during there have been some discussion today about the design workshops and their intention, and this allowed a greater understanding of the site and the options in which the wings might appear, their impact on setting and on all the other heritage assets were all matters that were discussed at that point. So this reflects again, and I would stress that to the inquiry, that it is a point of time at the end of that process. And what happened thereafter is obviously crucial to how those matters develop. So what may have been a requirement in 2009 would have been subject to the evolution of the design and greater knowledge of the history of the site.
That leaves my final question on this chapter, and probably the final question for today. If I've understood your evidence today correctly, you didn't have much understanding of the 2009 project apart from what you were told by Hoskins as a firm. And you certainly hadn't seen the EW18, but you'd seen some things. And that building, that concept, was lower than the wings, retained the lodge, and had 159 bedrooms. As a result of all the workshop work, the hotel shrank a little bit, but it got higher at the sides as part of the redesign in the workshops and afterwards and over that winter. And except when the council refused planning permission in 2015, at no point have you succeeded in reducing this below a 150-bedroom hotel of international standing with a wing on each side, have you?
I think that these relate to matters of the brief, which would be far better understood in terms of how the brief evolved between 2009 and 2014. And what I was aware of and had read quite carefully were the responses from the Edinburgh World Heritage Trust to there were letters that are part of the documentation here and referred to in several documents. I was fully aware of those, and also aware of the carefully considered views of historic Scotland as they were at that time. So took those into account also in terms of the assessments and how the scheme evolved. And I think it's probably useful for the inquiry to know that my view, certainly at that point, was that my tendency in terms of understanding the meaning of that advice was that it was going to indicate it's going to be very difficult to put anything within the West Playground, I think for reasons we've discussed. It was only over the duration of the workshops that became an issue in terms of changing some, and that's not related to the brief, it's related to the assessments that were going on. And to a degree, this does appear at the end of that process in the advice given to the architects by the City of Edinburgh Council, which is often referred to as the 7 points. So that is a material consideration for the context in which this document had been prepared, and I think it is important for the inquiry to know that.
Check one thing and then there may be one more question. So I'm proposing that we stop now. I have two small chapters which I will try and trim overnight because one of them has slightly been done already and I think I might take it out completely. I need to think about it. I also need to work out what on earth happened with Mr. Liventhal's unnumbered paragraphs. So I would anticipate about 20, it's my fault if anything happened, about 20 minutes tomorrow. I hope that's of assistance.
Perfect, thanks for that. That took you a little longer than the promised half hour.
I'm sure between myself and Mr. Wright we both said too many words.
Okay, good. We will suspend cross-examination in the hope that we, one way or another, will finish with Mr. Wright tomorrow morning.
It's in the hands of others, sir, by and large, but I would certainly hope that that is the case.
Okay, so now we should talk about programming.
Thank you, sir.
Any thoughts on that, Mr. Steele?
Well, sir, every thought that I've had has proved to be wildly inaccurate. It's really for others to indicate how long they might be in cross-examination because, as I say, all my guesstimates were, I could not have anticipated that at Friday lunchtime we would still have Mr. Wright sitting there. I had no idea that that was the case, so it's really for others to assist.
Can others assist with how long we are likely to be with the appellant's witnesses? We had an aspiration that they would be dealt with in 2 2 weeks?
I stupidly thought 2 weeks, sir. But
that's now looking very unlikely. I suppose we're working within a 4-week window for inquiry session 1. Do the parties have thoughts on whether that 4-week window is still realistic?
So, for my part, I don't. I would still have thought that in theory 4 weeks should suffice. I would have thought we would speed up after Mr. Wright, having regard to the importance of his evidence and the far-reaching tentacles of it into the appellant's case. The first thing I'd like to know is what the anticipated order of witnesses now is from the appellants, if we're still adhering to the order that we were told about at the beginning, or if there are any changes, because that may affect the position.
Well, that shouldn't affect the overall timing position, but I can say now that I cannot adhere to the original order that I indicated because of the time that this has taken. And what will happen now with the order is dependent on the indications you now give about cross-examination. We would intend, if possible, to lead Mr. Roger Maskell next, but that's dependent to some extent on how long you now indicate cross-examination may be.
In that case, going back to the overall position, as I say, I would still be hopeful that it should be possible to conclude the first session in about 4 weeks. I would have thought that it would be extremely helpful now to say that the council's case and the case of those coming after the council could be fixed for a week on Monday, the 1st of October, because it doesn't seem at all likely that, on any view, it would be realistic to expect those cases to start before then. In other words, the appellants would take the rest of this week and the whole of next week.
Sounds optimistic to me that we would be ready for the council's witnesses by then. You're not suggesting that we break the appellant's evidence and insert the council's evidence?
No, not at all. It would be that no one should anticipate the council giving evidence before then.
I think it's unlikely, isn't it?
I'm delighted if that is the case, sir, because that means that the rest of our witnesses' cross-examination will be nothing like what Mr. Wright has been subjected to, and we will be through our evidence by next Friday. I'd be delighted if that's the case, but as they say, ahe medoots, having witnessed what's happened this week.
Well,
I think from the council's perspective it would be helpful to say that it's highly unlikely that we would be taking their evidence before a week on Monday.
Well,
if that helps.
From the council's perspective, but also from my own friend on behalf of the appellants, that we know that that won't happen before then. That means that there's some control over the number of witnesses who need to be in attendance in the course of next week, and especially towards the end of next week. My view and perhaps unrealistic optimism is that in an inquiry like this, it takes a little time for the contentious issues to emerge. They've all been explored, or a considerable number of them have been explored by a considerable range of parties by the time Mr. Wright's completed his evidence. And it may be that there's more of a focus thereafter on subsequent witnesses when we're all more familiar with the productions and we know where the issues are. That's part of why I would hope that we might speed up. But if we don't, then there's still no harm in saying that the council won't start before a week on Monday.
For HES.
Yes, thank you, sir. I would anticipate that Mr. Thompson is probably right that 4 weeks is still a realistic estimate for the reason he just outlined, that it's probable that matters will speed up and cross-examinations will become shorter. And for that reason, I think it is achievable for the appellants to close their case at the end of next week, allowing Mr. Thompson's clients to begin at the beginning of the third week. My own input in terms of the extent of cross-examination, I don't see my cross-examinations as being anywhere near the length of the one I had of Mr. Wright, with apologies to Mr. Wright. And therefore I personally don't see any my involvement will not prevent that time frame being achievable, if I can put it that way. I can't speak for others, of course, sirs, but that's my own position.
Okay, thanks for that. Mr. McIntosh.
I'm very conscious that one of the things that appears to slow us all down, it's certainly been slowing me down, is the fact there are two schemes. And it's always been necessary to go back to a different document and make a comparison. And I can't see a way around that, certainly with a number of the professional witnesses over the next week or so. And just thinking of the witnesses that Mr. Steele's going to call, without naming them, many of them were involved in both stages, and therefore there is an interplay between what they thought about Scheme 1 and what they thought about Scheme 2, and that inevitably takes rather longer than we need. And it's one of the reasons why we have continuously complained about the existence of Scheme 1 in the debate. And if it takes a long time, well, that's the consequence of that. In terms of our time, having had a number of discussions with Mr. Wright where he has accepted that things are within professional judgment, it may be that when it gets to my witnesses, Mr. Steele also gets them to acknowledge that things are within professional judgment, and we have very short cross-examinations. But equally, knowing Mr. Steele, he'd be perfectly entitled to put them through the ringer. So I don't know how long. I think my witness is entirely in his hands, how long they'll take. But they could take 2 days for my witnesses.
As far as your cross-examination for the balance of the appellant's witnesses?
I think from the conversation with Mr. Wright today, I'm clearly going to be asking Mr. Gibbs some questions. It may reduce rather a lot with the others. Things do focus, and I hope I'm certainly going to have. I suspect the three of us on this table will have a conversation, and again try to not repeat each other's work, which I hope we haven't done so far.
Do 4 weeks still sound realistic to you?
They sound realistic, and our availability is manageable within the 2 days we might be using. So I'm not anticipating causing any problems.
Perfect, Ms. Coburn.
Yeah, I think 4 weeks is still manageable, because I would hope that we would all become a little more focused, but that's not to imply any criticism, it's just in terms of the evidence. And obviously Mr. Wright was always going to be a very important witness to those of us in opposition of the scheme. The others may be not quite as important or requiring such lengthy cross-examination. I would hope 4 weeks, but I'm not confident necessarily that we will have completed all of the appellant's witnesses within the 2, if you see what I mean.
It was all going so well. Mr. Ennis.
I think that's the real point, is the likelihood of completing the appellant's evidence by the end of next week, I think is slim, given the volume of witnesses. So that leads to the position as there will be an overrun, a likely overrun, in the context of the timing for the appellant. And I suppose realistically we should be looking for perhaps a couple of days of overrun in that context, and then it comes perhaps over to Mr. Steele to say, given the large volumes of evidence that he's going to have to cross, can he manage it in a lot less time because he's the only one crossing? And the likelihood is that will speed up dramatically just by its nature. So I suspect there will be an overrun, and I suppose the question also is raised is the extent whereby if there looks to be difficulties proceeding and getting this completed within the 4 weeks, in circumstances where a witness has not been given evidence for days, whether we at times might extend sessions to try and at least make progress rather than continually stopping. And I totally accept that in the context of a witness that's given evidence over many days, you can see the problems that occur in the latter part of the day in terms of just even managing all the documents and the attention and the focus. But I think some of the other witnesses will not be as lengthy, and it may be that we can sit more to 5 o'clock, and that will be another factor which will increase the progress that we'll probably make next week as opposed to this week.
Okay, thanks for that. Mr. Steele.
Sir, in my submission, the key to this is whether we can get through all of our witnesses by the end of next week. And the vote seems to be about a majority of 3-2, I think it is, that we will do that, which doesn't really, coming from lawyers, doesn't give me a lot of confidence, I have to say. But I would like to know whether and how long Mr. Maskell might be cross-examined for, because that is, for me, possibly the next witness. And whether I can lead him as the next witness is dependent on that. I can say that I have to reverse the order of the two architects, Mr. Gibb and Mr. Murray, due to availability issues. I cannot lead them at the beginning of next week, and I'll need to rejig the order. I'd like to lead Mr. Maskell next, but the first question is, how long is he going to be here for? And then I can identify possibly later this evening or shortly after the end of today the order that we will take, and I can contact my learned friends. Now, if we finish our case by the next Friday, I'm confident that the rest can be dealt with in the following 2 weeks. I would, however, draw attention to the fact it's 20 witnesses, and even looking at it, that means approximately 2 witnesses a day. Very approximately. That some will not, for some witnesses it's obvious we will not achieve that, for others it is obvious we will achieve that, but I would have thought that it is of the order of up to a couple of weeks it is required for the remaining 20 witnesses, and I understand fully that Mr. Innes wishes to sit much later, but please bear in mind that I don't want to be as tired as Mr. Wright here. I've got to cross-examine each and every one of these witnesses, and that can be a fairly long day, so I would ask that factor to be borne in mind. It's not as if there's a line-up of 4 or 5 against me and some of them can have a little rest or snooze, as the case may be, in between times. I cannot do that, so that's got to be borne in mind as well.
Thanks for that. I do apologise, Ms. Nimmo. I missed you sitting to the side of the column there. Is there anything that you want to add?
Well, I note that Dr. Rosemary Addison, the reply from the reporters was that perhaps she could be available from commencing from Monday, October the 1st. My witness, Ruth MacDonald, would only be available from Tuesday the 2nd. And from the beginning of the week, I was beginning to appreciate that, in fact, we might be rolling over, and from what the reporters replied to Dr. Rosemary Addison, that we might be rolling over slightly into that 3rd week, which suited me. So,
I think the likelihood, based on what we've heard this afternoon, is that we would be looking to have you and your witness and Mrs. Addison, or Dr. Addison, is it? Sorry, in the 4th week now rather than the 3rd week.
right.
If that suited you, that's great.
Yeah.
If Dr. Addison could only make week 3, I think we would make arrangements to fit her in there at some point.
Right. So that's fine then.
Yep.
Thank you.
Great.
So can I just add this as well, though? Having looked at the economic session, I do not now believe that will occupy the full 5 days of the 5th week, is it? Anyway, the week beginning the 15th. It may be possible, I'm just thinking aloud here, to move that back a day or so to give a little bit of flexibility.
That's the obvious solution, isn't it? That we, if we must have slippage, we slip it into the start of inquiry session 2. Does that present a huge problem for any of the parties?
I will double check, but I can't imagine it does, because we had assumed that it might last the whole of the whole of that week. Therefore, I'm assuming my witnesses are all available for the whole of that week, and there's only 1 or 2 witnesses from elsewhere, and they must have assumed that it could be at any time that week. So I would hope there isn't a difficulty, and if we moved it back a day or even 2, I still think we'd complete economics in 2, maximum 3 days.
Okay.
Can I just, sir, just before we close, just check the most pressing programming issue, which is knowing which witnesses are coming next. It's Mr. Maskell, I understand, will be giving evidence tomorrow, following on from Mr. Wright.
I think Mr. Steele needs to know how long Mr. Maskell is likely to be to confirm whether or not he will be on tomorrow.
There we go. Thank you. For my part, if Mr. Maskell says what he's saying in his report and his precognition, I wouldn't anticipate being more than half an hour to three-quarters of an hour. And I would suspect that if he sticks to those documents, it should be possible to conclude with him in the course of tomorrow. But I'm anxious to hear from Malin.
Is that everybody, or is that just yourself?
No, I'd say I would only be half to three-quarters of an hour, I anticipate. And I imagine that everyone else would. Well, I'll wait to hear.
Yes, as presently advised, sirs, I don't have all that many questions, and those questions that I do have, some of them may have been taken care of already. So again, I don't think I'll be all that long with Mr. Maskell.
I just wonder what that means, because I was originally told that you were going to be a couple of hours with Mr. Wright, not by you, but by somebody else. So I just wonder what not very long means, because it's quite important on a Friday to know that.
Well, less than has been indicated by Mr. Thompson. Half an hour of something of that sort. It's difficult to anticipate exactly.
Mr. McIntosh.
I'm in the same position as Mr. Thompson. If Mr. Maskell sticks to what he said, then I didn't anticipate it being very long at all. But if he conducts a response to Mr. Wright's, then we could be here for a long time.
Scobern.
Exactly the same, sir, and on the basis that Mr. Maskell's evidence is essentially a review of the assessment of Mr. Wright. So, provided Mr. Maskell restricts what he has said, what he says, to what he has got in his written evidence, then I won't be very long at all, and potentially won't have any questions, because they'll have been dealt with by the two learned friends going before me. So, with all due respect, that's within the hands of Mr. Maskell.
Mr. Innes.
I have a few questions for Mr. Maskell that may take upwards of an hour, so I suspect.
Okay, and Ms. Nemo? None. Okay, so it sounds to me that there is a fighting chance that Mr. Maskell's evidence could be taken within a day, or for about a day.
Yes, sir. I'm anticipating he will not start until late morning or so, possibly lunchtime.
And if necessary, is he available to complete evidence on Monday or not?
Well, I hope so, sir. What I'd like to do is we'll go downstairs to our room and discuss exactly what this means, and we'll let everybody, including yourself and others, know just as soon as practical.
Okay. Anyone else?
Yes, sir. There's no point in giving you the details now, but obviously Mr. Lowry, being a full-time lecturer, has some issues with availability, and I've been given a calendar which is migraine-inducing in terms of the colours that it has. I'm happy to explain what Mr. Lowry's availability is, but since we don't know, when Mr. Lowry is likely to be giving evidence, there doesn't seem to be a huge amount of point, but I'm just flagging up that there may need to be some consideration about taking Mr. Lowry out of order, just purely because of
his availability.
Yeah, because obviously students are not going to be terribly pleased if he's not there.
Well,
so
they might be.
Well, I might be, yeah, exactly.
I don't anticipate that would be a problem if we need to do that. It's our intention, we're very aware that there will be others out with this room who are trying to follow progress, and we did speak at the start of the week about trying to draft up a timetable. That looks pretty problematic, so what we intend to do is to have a case overview update put onto the DPA website each evening, just to confirm to people who haven't been here what progress we've made and who we anticipate being taken the next day. So for the minute, we will be saying for tonight's update that Mr. Wright should be completed tomorrow, and that at the minute we think it's likely that Mr. Maskell will be up next. Does that sound reasonable?
That sounds reasonable, sir. I don't know how long you'll remain in the building. If you're going to be here for 10 or 15 minutes, I can give you a definite on that.
Yeah, if you can do that within 15 minutes or so, we'll wait here. Anything else? Okay, anything else? Anyone? No. Okay, in that case, we'll finish for the night and start again at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. Thanks.